Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simcha to the dogim in the deep blue sea. Simcha to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about prophets like Jeremiah and Malachi, and sometimes leaders like Joshua and kings like Yoshiyahu or Josiah.
Hold on a second. What's with all these different names here? What happened to Zeke and Isaiah?
Rick, don't you like choices?
Sometimes, like rye bagel, egg bagel, milk chocolate, dark chocolate. It's always dark chocolate. But what's that got to do with Jeremiah, Malachi, Joshua? What are you doing?
Because this week we have a plethora of choices of Haftarot to talk about, as I'll explain in just a minute. But first, I'm Larry Herman, drinking some very fine wine and talking Haftarah with my good chaver, the king of cantillation, Rick Muller. How you doing, Rick?
I'm a little overwhelmed by the plethora of choices, plethora even, not to mention all the Passover preparations for my moving. We're moving to Thousand Oaks, but I'm good. Looking forward to the Seder and all the Passover fun.
Me too, Rick. Pesach is indeed one of my two favorite times of the Jewish year, the other being Sukkot. Fortunately, I don't have to choose between them. I just enjoy them when they come around.
Okay, but what's all this talk about choices?
Rick, as you know, this week we read Parshat Tzav, and the Haftarah associated with Tzav is from the book of Jeremiah, the namesake of our musical theme.
I thought our theme was frogs.
That too. But that very interesting reading from Jeremiah is only read about 1/3 of the time. On most years, as this year, Shabbat Ha-Gadol falls on the week of the Torah reading at Tzav. And so the Haftarah reading switches to the special reading for Shabbat Ha-Gadol, which is from Malachi.
Right. And since that's what we're reading, where's the choice?
Well, I'm not sure, but I do think that some people still read from Jeremiah. In any case, we wouldn't want to give Jeremiah short shrift, would we?
Nope. And while you're explaining, I looked up the reading for Tzav for next year, and I see that we do read from Jeremiah, so we'll get to that. Besides, there's lots of special Haftarot this time of year, as you've been pointing out for the last month or so. Lots of Haftarahs get left out.
Definitely true, Rick. But I'm not done with our choices. Sunday is the first day of Pesach, and the Haftarah for that day is from the book of Joshua, actually from 3 separate parts of that book, describing the first Pesach celebrated after the Israelites entered the land of Israel.
Okay, I suppose we could have chosen to discuss and read from Joshua.
But we could also have chosen to look at the Haftarah for the second day of Passover, when we read from the second book of Kings, and the very interesting and important story of King Yoshiyahu, who was a religious reformer, renovated the temple, and reinstituted the observance of the Passover offering as described in the Haftarah.
Well, we could choose that Haftarah, but since I know you follow the Israeli custom of not observing the second day of Pesach as a Chag, I'm going to assume that that's all just pedantry.
Well, I suppose you could say that, but I actually wanted to alert our viewers to the wealth of alternatives out there and to encourage them to read those Haftarahs over Shabbat and Pesach.
And maybe next year we can talk about Jeremiah, Joshua, or Yoshiyahu. But for now, can we just talk about Malachi?
Sure, Rick. I only have a few things to say before you hit the trope, as it were. First, we already discussed Malachi back in November, when we read the first part of his very short book for Parshat Toldot. I explained that there is some question as to whether Malachi is the name of a prophet or simply the description of a messenger.
Sure, I remember that.
For Shabbat Ha-Gadol, we read the last 21 verses of Malachi from chapter 3, And since Malachi is the last of all the prophets, at least as they appear in the collection of Nevi'im, we are actually reading from the very end of the prophets.
So maybe we should conclude with a chazak chazak v'ni chazek.
Perhaps we should. But that's the final point that I wanted to make. The Haftarah concludes with two verses that are very much connected to Passover. In the penultimate verse, God says that he will send the prophet Elijah to announce the time of redemption, similar to the redemption of the Passover story. And in the very final verse, we're told that Elijah will reconcile parents and children, reminiscent of the required transmission of the Passover story from parents to their children and the important role that children play at the Seder. At least that's my gloss on the ending.
And it's a very nice ending, especially the repetition of verse 23, which includes the word of Ha-Gadol, which reminds us of Shabbat Ha-Gadol. So here I just wanted to point out, because Eitz Chaim doesn't have a whole lot of Masoretic notes, excuse me, on the bottom of 1298, I wanted to translate those 6 words there. So it reads, Ba'Masorat HaKriya. So Masorah is tradition. That's where we get the word Masoretic from. The Masoretes were the rabbis that transmitted the tradition to us. Ba'Masurat HaKriya, in the tradition of the reading. Nishaneh or Nishneh, you repeat, we repeat. If it's the nun there, that's a we, a prefix.
I think it's the passive form. I think it is repeated. Nishneh, hapasuk.
Okay, hapasuk lifnei ha'acharon. So the verse before the end, the last. So the tradition is you don't end a Haftarah on a bad note. So the ending of verse 24 has the word cherem. You don't want to end the Haftarah on the cherem and then go off to Kiddush. You can't do that. So you've got to repeat the more positive verse about Elijah coming for dessert and a cup of wine, and it's a much happier thing.
I love it. That's great. I propose that we start the reading and we divide it into 3 sections this week. We start with verses 4 through 12, where Malachi is basically acting as an accuser of the people. Then in verses 13 through 19, God makes it clear that there is still hope for the righteous. And finally, the concluding and uplifting final 5 verses, starting with the image of the Son of Righteousness, that's S-U-N, Son, continuing with a reminder of the teaching of Moses, and concluding by looking forward to the mission of Elijah, as you were talking about, to proclaim our redemption.
And drink some wine at the Seder.
Yeah, somehow he manages to drink some wine from all our Seders and remain sober enough to make it to each of our homes. So the Haftarah begins on page 1296 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash. Rick, before you recite the bracha, do you have any thoughts on the verses 4 through 12?
Yes. So the Haftarah has no pazers, so we'll skip that, but it does have a zarka and a segol, the next rarest trope, right there at the beginning, verse 5. So by definition of my theory, it's the most important words of the Haftarah, and it's all about the karavti, I will come close to you, alechem la mishpat, in judgment, it gives actually examples of the worst things that God is going to judge us about, which I liked. Treating the widows and orphans and strangers poorly is a really horrible thing compared to sorcery and adultery and cheating your laborers. So those are all the bad things. But the most important thing is this day of judgment that's going to come, and putting that next to the very end of the Haftarah, where there's going to be a happy day when Elijah comes before the Messiah. At least I'm reading it as a happy day. I guess that could be a bad day too. But
happy days.
those are the bookends there. So the main trope again in verse 5, the zarka and the segol.
Wonderful.
One more thing. Sorry, in verse 10, just as a crazy synchronicity, echo Leonard Friedman and Rebecca in reading leading the Rashi class this morning on Noah, talked about the heavens opening up, the Arubot Hashamayim, with water to drown the world. And here in verse 10, Malachi is saying that the floodgates of the sky are going to be open to pour blessings down, bracha. So that's a nice thing. And then the very next verse echoes the Exodus story about the locusts eating up the land. So there's a parallel there too. Not much trope there, but I just thought the ideas were something to raise.
Well, Rick, I love those Kadman Ba'azlas, and we've got 3 of them, starting at the beginning of verse 7, the beginning of verse 8, the beginning of verse 10. At least the one on verse 7 reinforces what you were saying about the day on the days of your fathers, of your ancestors.
Yes.
So we do have some nice trope. Take it away starting with verse number 4, following the bracha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Ve'arva l'Adonai minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim ki mehei olam uchshanim kadmoniot. V'karavti alechem lamishpat v'hayiti ed memaher v'amchashvim uv'amna'afim uv'anishba'im lashaker uv'oshke sechar sachir amana Theatom umateger velo yireuni amar Adonai tzvaot ki ani Adonai lo shaniti ve'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chlitem lemimei avotechem sartem mechukai Velo shmartem shuvu elai ve'ashuva alechem amar Adonai tzvaot va'amartem ba'met nashuv hayikba Adam Elohim. And there's Adam. So there's Adam and then Noah and then the Exodus, if you look at it that way. Ki atem kovim oti va'amartem ba'mek va'anucha hama'aser v'hatruma ba'mera atem ne'arim ve'oti atem kovim hagoy kulo Havi'u ekol ma'aser el beit ha'otzar vihi teref beveiti uchanuni na bazot amar Adonai tzvaot im lo eftach lachem et arubot hashamayim Vaharikoti lachem beracha ad belidai v'garti lachem ba'ochel v'lo yashchit lachem et pri hadama v'lo tshakel lachem hagefen basadeh amar Adonai tzvaot v'ishru etchem Kol hagoyim ki tiyu atem eretz chefetz amar Adonai tzvaot.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Okay, in the second section, what jumps out to me trope-wise are the Zakef Gadols on Amartem and Va'amartem in verse 13 and 14, and then 15, there's another one. Va'amartem, da 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 is the way I do it. you should say, and you should say, and then verse 15, and now. So the rabbis who put this to music, they wanted to link those phrases together, and then to me it links up with the ending, verse 24, penavo, lest I will bring. So you should say these things and do these things so that the terrible day of destruction and judgment doesn't come. So that those link up trope-wise. And there's another one, La Yom, verse 17, on that day, to the day. Verse 19 has Hikihine, Hayom, the day is coming. But hopefully it'll be a happy day when Elijah comes. To settle all machlakats, by the way. He's supposed to come and settle all the disputes also, right?
And in terms of the context, Rick, I really like verse 18 when it says, according to the Alter translation, and you shall turn back and see between righteous and wicked, between him who serves God and him who does not serve him.
Yeah, you'll see the difference is what it is.
There you go.
In the English here. So sometimes it's not easy to see the difference between those two, you know?
There you go. But we try to see. All right, why don't you take it away? Verse 13 through 19.
Chozku alai, divrechem amar Adonai, v'amartem, ma nidbarnu alecha, amartem, shav avod Elohim, umabetza, ki shamarnu mishmarto, Vechi halachnu kedoranit mipnei Adonai tzvaot. Ve'ata anachnu me'ashrim zedim gam nivnu osei risha gam bachanu Elohim vayimaletu. Az nidberu Yirei Adonai ish et re'ehu Vayakshev Adonai vayishma Vayikatev Sefer Zikaron lefanav Liyirei Adonai Ulchoshvei Shmo V'hayuli amar Adonai tzvaot layom asher ani oses gula v'chamalti alechem kasher yachmol ish al beno ha'oved oto v'shavtem Uritem ben Sadik l'Rasha ben Oved Elohim la'asher lo avado ki hine hayom ba boer katanur v'hayu chozedim v'cholosei risha kash Velihat otam hayom haba amar Adonai tzvaot asher lo ya'azov lahem shoresh ve'anaf.
You know, Rick, there's a lot of wonderful trope in those verses.
Yeah.
I've grown to appreciate your reading of and the importance of those Zakef Gadols almost as much as my favorite Kadmav Azlaz. But those couple of Dargat Tavirs as well give a real dramatic reading to those verses.
Yes, yeah.
All right, what have you got for us now in the final 5 verses, starting with verse 20?
Okay, well, again, the Kadmavia's law introduces the idea of the sun shining, right? Zoreach is shining, Zarcha, Zoreach, something like that.
So
And
it's interesting because there's a difference in the way in which the JPS translates that and the way in which Alter does. The JPS translates that as, "But for you who revere my name, a sun of victory shall rise to bring healing." And here in Alter he says, "But to you who fear my name shall dawn a sun of righteousness." So one is victory and one is righteousness.
Yes.
With healing in its wings. And I got to admit, I kind of like the righteousness as a translation of tzedek than victory.
Yeah. And the sun with the wings on it, that was a classic symbol of the sun god Ra in Egypt, man. When we were putting the blood on the doorposts and on the lintel, on the mashkof, that's where the sun god was there with the little wings. So putting blood on the sun god, that's also a great connection to Exodus. And then you have the calves in the next part of that. You're supposed to slaughter the calf for the Paschal sacrifice. All that.
Right.
There's lots of stuff in here. Anyway, then Zichru also Zakef Gadol in verse 22. Zichru, remember what you should be remembering. The good stuff.
What you should be remembering is Torah Moshe.
Yes.
The Torah of Moshe.
Right.
Which basically starts with the Passover.
Yes. Yes, it does.
And then those last two verses that we've already discussed.
Yes, ending on a happy note.
Right, where I'm about to send to you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the day of the Lord, great and fearsome. And he shall bring fathers' hearts back to sons, and the sons' hearts back to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with utter destruction. And there's that cherem, that destruction that they didn't want to have, that bitter taste, as you said. So they decided, let's repeat verse 23. All right, Rick, take us home.
Okay. V'zarcha lachem yirei shmi shemesh tzedakah umarpe bichnafecha vitzatem ufishtem ke'eglei marbek ve'asotem rishayim ki yiyu efer tachat kapot raglechem bayom asher ani oseh amar Adonai tzvaot zichru Torat Moshe Avdi asher siviti oto v'chorev al kol Yisrael chukim umishpatim hine anochi sholeach lachem et Eliah hanavi lifnei bo Yom Adonai Ha-Gadol ve'hanora ve'shiv levavot abanim v'lev banim alavotam penavo v'keti et haaretz cherem hine anochi sholeach lachem et Eliah hanavi lifnei bo Yom Adonai Ha-Gadol ve'hanora.
Wonderful. You know what, Rick? I'm glad we made the choice to read this Haftarah this week.
Me too.
We wish you all Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Ha-Gadol Shalom, a Chag Sameach V'Kasher, Happy Pesach. Don't forget to write us. Our email should be below. And thanks again to Norm Gar for all that he does to make these things more attractive. Anyway, Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.